Hello, everybody. Good morning. This is the first time ever this happens that the countdown timer for our session is not working with the music and the stuff in the background. What happened? I don't know. But well, here we are. And I am waiting to see, just to make sure that we are indeed live and that you can see us on the screen. You should be able to see us in a second. All right, there we are. All right, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever in the world you are connecting from today. Thank you so much for being part of the Hacking HR live chats conversations that we've had since the beginning of this year. For those of you who don't know, we are this all the live sessions that we've had over the past couple of months. They are posted on our Hacking HR website. So you can go to hackinghr.io and there's a link that says live chats. Of course, they are not live anymore, but they were live when they were recorded. And you will see them in there. Just click in there, and we have a number of great conversations in the website. We have amazing guests coming up over the next few weeks. We scheduled a number of incredible conversations for you, and I hope that you take advantage of all these conversations, that you get the books from the many authors that we are inviting to the Hacking HR live chats. I am excited about the conversation today, and before welcoming our guest to the stage, I wanted to ask you all to please let us know where you are connecting from. So please, in the chat, let us know whatever it is you're connecting from, your city, your country. I would love to know where each of you is located. If you have any questions during the conversation for my guest, please feel free to post it in the chat. I'll make sure, or I'll try to do my best to bring that question to Sally. So please let us know where you're connecting from. Thank you so much for being here. Once again, I am super excited about this conversation. And we're going to be talking about, let me see, there you are, rising together, how we can bridge divides and create a more inclusive workplace. We have been talking so much about this over the past few months and years in Hacking HR. Very exciting opportunities and possibilities to do better. We know that there's a long road to go ahead of us, but I think the fact that so many of us are talking about it and are making or creating more accountability from our workplaces and doing more to create more inclusive workplaces, I think that is exciting. Yes, we are not where we should be, but we are working towards getting there. And that to me means a lot. So we're going to be talking about rising together. So Sally, are you ready for the screen? I'm going to be bringing you on board. There you are. All right. Hi, Sally. Good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, Enrique. It's good to be with you and with your audience today.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I am excited about the conversation about rising together. So let's begin here, Sally. For those, you can tell by the in the chat, we have people from all over the world: Germany, Pakistan, India, Ethiopia, South Africa, the US. Let me see where else: Nigeria, and Puerto Rico, Thailand. Please let us know, everybody, where you're connecting from. This is very exciting to see you all here. Sally, for our audience, can you please share more about who you are, your work? Why are you writing about Rising Together, which you've been writing about inclusion for so many years? So can you tell us more about that?
Certainly. I'm Sally Helgesen, and I work in the areas of inclusive leadership and women's leadership. Started in 1990 when I wrote a book called The Female Advantage: Women's Ways of Leadership, which was the first book to look at what women had to contribute rather than how they needed to change and adapt. And one of the things when I was writing that book that I noticed, because I was studying women leaders, is that they tended to structure their organizations differently. And they operated in a very inclusive way generally. I'm not saying all women operate in an inclusive way, but it was a definite tendency in the leaders I studied. So I wrote a book in 1995 called The Web of Inclusion. and that was the first book to bring the language of inclusion into organizations. It's credited with that. So that was 95. Now, it's something really interesting. When I wrote that book, the idea was providing a structure and a way of operating that would suit the technology that was evolving because it was much
Mm.
more networked. So I wasn't thinking of diversity at all. But within a couple of years, the whole idea of inclusion had gotten picked up in organizations that were trying to find a way to deal more effectively with a much more diverse workforce. And I think they pair very beautifully because given the highly diverse nature of the workforce globally today. And I've been in many of those places that you cited doing work over the years. And so this is a global issue. Leading by inclusion is really the only way of successfully leading
Mm.
a highly diverse workplace, because people who are outside the traditional leadership mainstream are more likely to feel excluded.
Absolutely, Sally. Well, thank you so much once again for being here, and well, for writing the book in 1995 and beginning this conversation about inclusion. Let me ask you this: what has changed? I mean, besides the obvious, right? We are a more globalized world today, thanks to technology. Therefore, we got to think more openly, perhaps, about diversity and inclusion. But other than those, what's obvious? What has changed since 1995 to now, 2023?
Well, first of all, I think that the people who are not necessarily, I think the work that HR has done has been enormously helpful in general, not always, because it varies by company, but the work that people in HR have done has been very effective in helping uh, sort of bring a presumption that we all need to get better at working together. And one of
Mm.
the things I was there to witness was the start of the what we now call ERGs or BRGs, employee resource groups or business resource groups, which began as networks, women's networks, and then expanding it to networks for people of color, or depending on what the local culture was. So those networks have been an extraordinary resource. When they began, they were like, you know, bring some lunch to my office and we'll talk about these issues. It was very informal and there were no resources allocated to them, but they have been a source, I think, not only of alliances and confidence and leadership development, and a feeling of belonging in organizations for the people who are part of them. But they have been a resource for all kinds of ideas
Mm.
in organizations. So they really have been significant in helping people be a part of, feel a part of, and that's been quite something to witness. I've
Yeah.
had an upfront seat because I've worked in so many of them, and so many companies have brought me in to help them. So that's been great. Much more
Yeah.
solidarity among people, and
Yeah.
more confidence.
Yeah. And I think that's once again, it's very positive, right? We have a long way to go to continue creating more inclusion in the workplace. But those steps, brought us to where we are today, and hopefully, what we're doing today will bring us to the place where we want to be tomorrow. And Sally, let me ask you this: your take on diversity and inclusion. I know so many people. They know that they deliver value for the humans at work and for the business, right? It's not one or the other; it's both.
Yes.
But for some reason, which if you want to expand on that as well, that would be great. But for some reason, it has become the check in the box kind of thing. Like how many trainings on diversity we're doing, what is the quota for women in our leadership positions, what other schools besides Ivy League schools are we reaching out to expand our talent pipeline. And when we look and scrutinize what's really happening inside those organizations that are checking the box for diversity and inclusion, is that no real changing is happening. Uh, I want to know your take on this, on training in diversity, on quotas, on unconscious biases training, and whatnot. All of those things that we've done uh, on behalf of diversity and inclusion.
Well, first of all, diversity is sort of taking care of itself because the workplace has become, the talent pool is far more diverse than
Mm.
it was. So organizations are trying to find a way to identify, bring in, and then most importantly, retain and engage diverse talent. So in terms of bringing people in, they've gotten, many organizations have gotten pretty good. But in terms of the retention and engagement, I think there's been a struggle. And I'm not, I have seen unconscious bias training done well, uh, but I have also seen it done very, very poorly. It
Mm.
depends so much upon the skill of the trainers. So I think there's been really too much emphasis on unconscious bias training as the method of engaging diverse employees, because number one, it's unconscious. You know, we all have biases, we all have things in our heads. Oh, I don't really like that. You know, that's how we are, that's how we are as humans. So getting together with people and talking about them, first of all, it has to do with our thoughts, not our actions. That's what a bias is. It remains in your head. There's no action proposed, you know,
Mm.
as I interviewed uh, for Rising Together, Mike Kaufman, who at that time was the CEO of Cardinal Health Care, and he said something. He gave me a great phrase. He said, "It's all aha moment. No, now what?" And that's what I find that
Mm.
organizations are really are struggling with. It's the now what? What do we do? So, you know, the unconscious bias training done well can be a first step. Done poorly, it probably is not a good idea.
Yeah.
It also has a very negative focus. So I don't think that, I mean, I have this all the time. Clients say, "Oh, we're rolling out unconscious bias training to, you know, our top 4,000 worldwide people." Okay, fine. You talk to them in a year. Well, it didn't really move the needle. Yeah, it didn't help them understand the how. And the
Mm.
how is something I learned from the remarkable success of How Women Rise, my most recent book, which I co authored with Marshall Goldsmith. Very focused on how. How do women rise? What actions can you take? How can you break internal barriers? And I think the check the box, as you say, Enrique, approach to, well, we're bringing in the unconscious bias
Mm.
training has been limiting, and it has left people wondering, okay, now I know what I think and I know what the people I work with think, but what do we do differently? And that's why I wrote Rising Together, to address that. How do we do this? How do we
Yeah.
move beyond focusing on bias and difference to focusing on what are our behaviors, what are our actions, what kind of actions can we take that bring people together?
Oh, I love that. And it's a great segue to my question about specifically about rising together, which is you identified 8 triggers that prevent us from better connecting with other people that are seemingly different than us, you know, in race, ethnicity, gender, sexual identity, whatever it is. Can you mention some of those triggers as well?
Sure. For example, visibility is a big
Mm.
trigger. People tend to be triggered by those who they feel are more visible or connected or
Mm.
better positioned than themselves when those people are very active in pursuing it. So if we feel triggered by someone else's visibility, we may think, well, you know, I hear this all the time. Well, if I have to be a showboat like that guy down the hall in order to be noticed around here, no, thank you. Well, no, you don't have to be a showboat. And by the way, why is he a showboat? Because he's good at talking about what he contributed. He may do so in a different way than you would feel comfortable doing it. You know, he might say, "I had the client eating out of my hand," and you might be more comfortable saying, "The client and I really bonded." But you can learn from a person who is really good at that rather than allowing yourself to be triggered by what your perception of what that person does. Now, how do you know you're triggered? Number one, a trigger is just an emotional response to any situation. So you're responding emotionally. I don't want to be like that. I don't like that guy. But then, so that's fine. We all are triggered by things. It's not, the trigger isn't the problem. The problem is that we then, when we feel triggered, we tell ourselves a story. We have a kind of self-serving narrative, like, I'm not going to be like that. I'm a better person, whatever.
Mm.
And that narrative is what keeps us stuck, because it doesn't give us a path forward. It doesn't give us an opportunity to learn, what does he do that he's good at that I may not be that comfortable with, but that I could learn from. So we have no path forward. And that's true with so many of the triggers I talk about in the book, things around demonstrating competence or confidence, fairness. Fairness is a big trigger. That's not fair. We make
Mm.
assumptions there. Humor, how we communicate, a range of triggers. So I think in the book, I try to address in a very, I'd say, down to earth and sometimes blunt way, based on what I've watched over the last 35 years, which are the triggers that are most likely to get in people's ways.
That is fantastic, and I am reflecting about the two triggers that you mentioned. Visibility and fairness, and having heard and having been there myself. It's not. I mean, like, we're talking about this, and I am sure we're not preaching to the choir here. This is a probably a struggle within ourselves too, when we see something that may not align with the way we are, and we think, "Oh, that is not fair." Why is this person getting that job and not me? Right? How do we manage that internally in our own minds? For those who are triggered by that.
Exactly. So it's not fair. Now, that's a very common trigger. Someone, you don't get promoted or you don't get
Mhm.
appointed to a project team that you thought you were in line for that promotion or to be on that team. And you're shocked by that. So that's your emotion. That's fine. Your response, it's your emotional response. But your instinctive feeling is that that wasn't fair. But then you go to a narrative. Well, they're very good at promoting men around here, and I guess women can't ever get, or whatever it is. You can go to that. And guess what? That may be true, but it may not be true. It may not be true. Maybe there
Mhm.
was something that he contributed that you don't know about, or maybe he was just better. I always say a great career is built on three legs: visibility, connections, and expertise. Maybe that person was better at demonstrating, at being visible. Maybe that person was better at building connections, and that's what they were looking for. So
Mm.
you don't actually know. So you may suspect that, but it's better to rewrite the script and sort of tell yourself a story. That's interesting. I see that they promoted him. I thought it was going to be me. He really does have much broader connections than I have within the company, within the client sector, in the community, whatever it is. Maybe that's something that I could benefit from working on. So you don't have to believe this sort of rewritten script. You don't. Exactly, it wasn't fair. But if you find a way to give yourself a path forward, then you are not going to be stuck in the same kind of way that you would if you remained with the most convenient narrative that kind of explains to yourself why it wasn't fair.
Let me ask you something, Sally. As part of that path forward, do we need to talk about it with someone else in the organization? Let me
Yes.
give you one example, right?
Yeah.
You are the person who wasn't promoted, and then you see, well, Sally was promoted. It's not fair. I work harder than Sally, or because you don't see the connections, you don't see the other things, right? And then I go to talk to HR, but then I feel that if I talk to about that to HR, maybe there can be an element of me being canceled for future opportunities because I'm even raising this up. So I'm connecting two dots in here, or bringing 2 points in here. Point number one is How do we talk about creating that path forward? Who do we talk about it with? And number two, what if we talk about it and the reaction is not what we are expecting it to be?
Well, it depends on how we talk about it. And that's why these narratives can be so helpful to sort of rewritten. Say we really feel like that wasn't fair.
Mm,
I put in more work on that project. I got better, results on that project. And it seemed to me that I would have gotten that promotion. If you choose to talk to HR, first of all, in terms of talking to people, our response then is to grab our own people who we feel will be sympathetic to us, and then complain to them.
mm,
That really doesn't give us a path forward. If we go to
mm,
HR, and here's how we start the conversation that's going to have a very different outcome. I had imagined that I was going to be appointed to that project team, and I saw that so and so was. And what would be helpful for me going forward is to have an understanding of what kinds of qualities that he demonstrated that I did not,
mm,
that led to that outcome, because I want to be able to consider, how I might move forward and how I might be chosen the next time. So this is already done. They're not going to fire the guy. The decision is made. They're not going to move him out because of your complaint. So by framing it in a positive way, what can I do? What can I learn from this situation? What might I be developing? What areas might I be focusing on and contributing, that 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 would position me better? It's also interesting, since you don't know. I mean, I have a wonderful story in the book. I can't go into the details about the woman who bought the humble pie. But when she had an honest conversation with the with the guy who had been promoted over her, what she recognized in talking to him was that this actually, the job promotion would not have been a good fit for her. That it
mm,
didn't that it
mhm.
didn't suit her skills, that it involved a lot of kind of work that she wasn't interested in. So we often will make those kinds of presumptions. So that was a case where, rather than talking to HR, she waited until she had calmed down a bit. Then she found a very humorous way of approaching him and saying, "Look, it's hard to work with you. I thought I was going to get this job." And having a great conversation with her that she says turned her career around.
Wow, yeah.
It turned her direction around. So that's our thing. We want to not get stuck with the negative side of these emotions, and sort of tweaking the story we're telling ourselves can serve us, to move this whole thing forward.
Yeah. I'm thinking about two perhaps foundational elements for this to happen. Number one, the person that uh, engages in these kinds of conversations, thinking about a path forward, must have a higher level of emotional maturity to go through something like that and say, I am going to talk to the person who actually got the promotion, to find out and tell him or her, I thought that was going to be for me. And, I want to just talk to you. And number two, it also requires perhaps some trust that the reasons for which that one person was promoted were or are reasons that you think are the right reasons. What do you think about that emotional maturity and trust in the middle of these conversations, if they make
Well,
sense?
I don't think all those things are required,
Okay.
actually. I think that the trust is not necessarily there, because in fact, that person may have been unfairly promoted over you. So
Mm,
you don't have to completely trust that this process was wonderful. All you're doing is looking for a way for you to learn something from this experience that will be helpful
mm,
to you going forward. In terms of emotional maturity, I think it's a question of discipline and habit to some extent,
yeah.
which really probably does translate into emotional maturity. But the discipline to think, okay, yeah, this feels really bad. I may not have all the answers. There may be another story. Let me try to learn from this. And the important thing, Enrique, is if you make the decision to go to the person who got the promotion, that you don't just drop it in their lap like, I need to have a talk about this because I feel really bad about it. You need to frame it in a more positive way that just doesn't, gives them a way to respond. Like, you know, I was expecting this. Congratulations. I was expecting this. It's a little hard for me right now.
Mm,
And it would be helpful for me to know, you know, do you, do you think that you did things differently than I did? Did you think that the way I was contributing wasn't necessarily as valued as it seemed to me? I want to learn from this. I want to learn from you what you think you did that was effective. And I want to be able to incorporate that going forward. This is hard. This
yeah.
isn't easy. I mean, triggers are hard, but it's more fruitful than getting stuck, than feeling bad, than, oh, they don't get it. They'll never appreciate me. This
Mm,
place is, blah, blah, blah. We've gone down that road. We know where that road leads.
yeah.
And it leads to sort of toxic bonding. It's a form of bonding. And you see a lot in organizations where there's a lot of gossip and there's a lot of negative conversation among people. It's that feeling of fairness often, but it then gets stuck and it keeps them stuck.
Yeah, I love the perspective and the idea of being disciplined, because it's for you at the end of the day. If
Mhm.
it's your own path forward, and you can complain all you want and about the organization, and you may be right about some things and maybe not about others, but it's your own path forward. And I like that, because I think all of us have experienced workplaces where we think something is not fair, and we get stuck in the place of, it's not fair and I won't do anything else, or I will decrease the quality of my work because I don't think that was fair. And I think it's a very interesting idea to be disciplined about your own
Yeah.
path forward. Sally, one of the things that you talk a lot about in the book are behaviors for inclusion and belonging, and I want to talk about that. So, can you please tell us what is belonging, what is inclusion, and how we can build them in the workplace?
Yeah, well, an inclusive culture is essentially a culture where people feel as if they have a sense of belonging. And you can always tell
Mm,
if it's an inclusive culture or an inclusively managed team because people talk about we. If they talk about they, you know it's not.
mm,
So it's that feeling of we, that feeling of common purpose, that feeling of moving together toward a goal with other people and being part of that and being seen for what your contributions are, but also what your potential is, what you could contribute. And that's harder for people who are, stand outside what has been the traditional leadership mainstream in whatever group that is. In the United States, it would be white males. In Japan, it would be Japanese men, whatever country it is. You can't just use the phrase white male because once you get outside of North America and much of Europe, it doesn't necessarily apply.
yeah.
So there's that feeling of that likelihood. So what I'm proposing in this book, the first part of the book looks at these triggers and how we can address them. So those are very specific sort of ideas. I'm not going to call them solutions, but they're ideas, suggestions, tips for dealing with those situations. And then the second half of the book, as you point out, is about inclusive behaviors. And this is
Mm,
because I would like to shift the conversation away from biases and different into inclusive behaviors. What can we do? How can we listen to people in a way that is most likely to make them feel heard? So
mm,
listening is not just something that's going on in our head, but something that we're demonstrating to them, that we're enacting to them. We're building on things they say. How do we build on what other people say in a meeting in a way that helps make them feel included and
mm.
spurs them on to participate in a more active way? How do we, if we're inviting people broadly to a meeting, that's a really good idea, not just having the same old usual suspects in every meeting, but bringing some people in and then making them feel heard and making sure they sit. I mean, I've seen it done, and well, we're going to invite the junior tier here, and then the poor junior tier is all backed up against walls. If they say anything, then
Nobody asks them or anything.
right, their boss or their boss's boss has to turn around to hear them. That's not going to be in any way effective. And I've seen it done wonderfully, bringing in people to sort of demonstrate. I think that's one of the things that often in organizations doesn't serve the idea of we. Meetings are very much according to who's at what level, and that's how this meeting is done. So there are all kinds of things we can do. They're nominating people for awards. If we're in a senior position, really being very active about asking the junior people who report to us, what are your aspirations? What might you see yourself doing? And what skills would you be interested in developing? What connections do you want to develop? Is there anyone I can introduce you to? Those kinds of things that we demonstrate an attitude of inclusion. And it starts with us. We're not waiting for someone. They really change the culture of teams and of organizations.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sally. And one of the things that I love about what you just said, but also about the book, is that these are not mandates by the CEO telling everybody you have to be inclusive. These are everyday behaviors. You just mentioned the one sort of quintessential example, right? The meeting where there's somebody that for whatever reason, it's not that that person may be an introvert, it's whatever reason, that person has great ideas, but is not talking or not expressing those ideas. It's on you maybe to create the conditions and the environment for that person to come forward. So even in those very tiny interactions, you can create that inclusive organization. And I love that. I think it gives us responsibility and accountability individually in the organization to create that inclusion that you're talking about.
Exactly. And in the work I've done with leaders, I have seen them be frustrated because they will do this. They'll say, we're all going to be inclusive. This is going to be, a highly ranked, inclusive organization. But then that's all they do. They just state this aspiration, but there are no hows attached to it, no specificity around it. So I have tried in Rising Together to be as specific as possible. And guess what? This is what I talk about in this book applies to leaders. They can use it to build a more inclusive culture. It certainly applies to team leaders, where that feeling of willingness to collaborate and trust and being part of the team is so important. But we can also do these things as individuals. We don't have to wait until the organization makes some big declaration about inclusion. We can start behaving we can start thinking about what actions can I take today in this meeting, this week, this month, that will help me build stronger and more effective relationships with as broad a range of people as is possible. This gives us more opportunity to be seen because people know us. It certainly strengthens our ability to find out information that might be helpful because we find it out through other people. And it gives us a support network. And there is nothing in our working lives that is more important than having a rich and deep network of support. That's the whole game. We can't do this alone.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sally. And as we get closer to the end of our conversation, I mean, this went by so quickly. I want to ask you, I think this one question may take another entire, 40 minutes or hour, but it's about this idea of, or this phenomenon of cancel culture. And I want to ask you about this in the context of building inclusive workplaces and rising together. And I have observed that there are people who want to do the right thing, but in asking questions or in saying something in their own path forward, they may think that they will be judged or they can be canceled just for asking a question. And think they may think, well, we're trying to build inclusion, but if I ask this question, will this inclusion apply to me as well? What's your take on that?
I think that the best way to handle that, if we're concerned that if we ask a question that we could end up getting the kind of pushback that would, and it depends on what we mean by canceled here. Does
Yeah.
canceled mean that other people don't like us? Does canceled mean that we end up being demoted? Does canceled mean that people go on social media and start talking about how horrible we are? Whatever it is, so we want to define what that fear is, rather than just broadly targeting the whole culture as potentially that. But I think that when we have that, what we want to do is we want to test out what we want to ask on a broad range of people. And here again,
Mm.
this is why having a good network is important. I'm thinking I would like to bring this up because I think this is a problem and it's bothering me. Um, ask 6 or 7 people in confidence that what do you think? How is this framing? Am I thinking of bringing this up in the right forum to the right
Mhm.
person, etc. See, we can't, these decisions, especially when we make them and we're feeling bad and we're feeling emotional, we can make a pretty bad decision on how we're going to do this. And I definitely have seen, and this isn't just recent, I have seen people blow up their careers 35 years ago by lodging complaints that were the wrong complaint or with the wrong person or in the wrong forum. I've seen that. That's not anything that's new. Social media has added this terrible layer to it. But we want to exercise good judgment and
Mhm.
discretion. And when we're feeling emotional, the best way to do that is to seek advice before we do anything.
Yeah.
And I know from my own experience that when I have done that, my actions have been much more wisely judged. So, what we want to sort of fight here because of this culture that we've evolved of people paying huge and outsized prices sometimes for raising simple issues, what we want to fight is that feeling of loneliness and grievance, because
Mhm.
that won't serve us. It's
Yeah.
like, here's an issue. I think we need to address this. I'm going to ask this person, that person, that person, that person, how they would do it. And that's not just, your buddies or the people who are going to say, yeah, you really got gypped on that one. No, it's people, a broader range of people. And to do that, I'd like your advice. This is bothering me. I haven't been able to let it go. Do you think that this would be a good forum for me to raise this in? By forum, I'm
Mm.
not talking about publicly. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the right person.
Yeah, absolutely. Sally, besides everybody getting the Rising Together book, I want to ask you one last question. If there was one thing that you would love to see more individuals getting engaged with in their organizations to rise together and bridge divides, one thing that they can start doing right now, what would that thing be?
I think that really, if there is a network or a resource group uh, that is doing some interesting things, get involved in that, get active in that.
Mm,
It will help you be. You'll learn a lot. You'll meet lots of people. You'll feel more supported. You will be more visible in the organization and not just join it, but get active, ask to
mm,
head some initiative or whatever. It's a really good career builder in addition to other things. So I think if
yeah,
there's a network there, and what the good thing is that a lot of these networks now also have ally networks. So
yeah,
I work in organizations, they have a women's network. There are plenty of men who are part of it. who are active in it. So I think that's a really good path forward, and to define it broadly. It's not just, okay, those people, that group, but I could also join and see if I could be a resource or ask somebody about it.
Love that. Sally,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being here with me and our community and sharing all of your amazing insights and some of the ideas behind the book Rising Together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Enrique. I've enjoyed it, and I agree with you. The time went by so quickly.
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much, Sally, and thank you, everybody. This conversation will be posted on our website together with the other conversations and the ones that we're going to be having in the future as well. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll see you soon. Thank you, Sally.
Bye-bye. My
Bye.
pleasure.
Thank you.